He was the ghost at booth 4, a millionaire who owned half the city, yet he ordered the same $2 coffee and dry toast every single morning. For 3 years, Kenjiro Sato never spoke a single word to anyone. The staff at the Morning Star diner called him a madman, a recluse, a forgotten relic. They gossiped, they stared, they dismissed him. They saw a broken old man in a tailored suit. But they weren't really looking. A young waitress, Sarah, saw something else. She saw a pattern in the chaos, a language in the silence. And one Tuesday morning, she decided to answer back, setting in motion a chain of events that would unravel a story of devastating heartbreak, expose a breathtaking act of betrayal, and prove that the most profound conversations don't always need a voice. What she did next would change everything. The Morning Star diner wasn't the kind of place you'd expect to find a millionaire. It was a relic of a bygone era, nestled on a less-traveled street in downtown Cleveland. The vinyl on the booths was cracked like old leather. The air hung thick with the ghosts of 1,000,000 bacon breakfasts, and the coffee was strong enough to strip paint. It was a place for truckers, early risers, and people whose lives had taken a turn that required cheap, comforting food. And then there was Mr. Sato. Every morning, at precisely 7:05 a.m., the bell above the door would jingle with a polite, almost apologetic chime. In would walk Kenjiro Sato. He was a man of stark contrasts. His suit, always a shade of charcoal or navy, was impeccably tailored, the kind of material that whispered of wealth, not shouted it. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. Yet his face was a roadmap of a sorrow so deep it seemed to have carved the lines there itself. His eyes, dark and intelligent, held a permanent vacancy, as if he were looking at a world that existed just behind the one everyone else saw. He would walk, not with a shuffle, but with a deliberate, measured pace to the same place every day. Booth 4. It was the one by the window, the one with a long, deep crack in the red vinyl seat that everyone else avoided. He'd slide in, place his hands flat on the table and wait. The first time Sarah Jenkins served him, she was new. Brenda, the diner's veteran waitress with a beehive hairdo and a tongue sharp enough to cut glass, had pulled her aside. "Listen, kid," Brenda had said, tapping a long, red fingernail on her order pad. "That's Mr. Sato, booth 4. He gets 1 black coffee, 1 order of dry wheat toast. No butter, no jam. Don't ask. Just bring it. He'll leave a $50 bill under the saucer when he's done. Doesn't matter if the check is $3.50. It's always a 50. He won't speak, he won't look at you, and he won't acknowledge you. He's the ghost. Got it?" Sarah, a 22-year-old art history major, trying to pay her way through Cleveland State, nodded. It seemed simple enough. But when she approached the booth, the sheer force of the man's silent presence was unnerving. It wasn't hostile or arrogant. It was an emptiness so profound it felt like a physical weight in the air. She placed the coffee and toast on the table. "Here you are, sir," she said, her voice sounding unnaturally loud in the bubble of silence that surrounded him. He didn't flinch. His gaze remained fixed on something beyond the window. He simply blinked, a slow, methodical motion. Sarah retreated, feeling as if she had intruded upon a sacred ritual. For 3 years, this ritual remained unchanged. The other staff paid him little mind anymore. He was just part of the furniture, the diner's resident eccentric. Frank, the diner's owner, a burly man whose apron was perpetually stained with grease, saw him as a reliable, if strange, source of income. "Kid's probably got Alzheimer's or something," Frank would grumble, flipping burgers on the grill. "Rich families are all the same. Stick the old man somewhere he won't be an embarrassment, and let him waste his money." They all had their theories. Brenda was convinced he'd lost his mind after a bad business deal. A young line cook named Marco thought he was a retired spy, hiding in plain sight. They spun tales around him, turning him into a local legend, a cautionary tale about the loneliness of wealth. But none of them ever tried to truly understand him. They saw the what, but never bothered with the why. Sarah, however, was different. Maybe it was her artist's eye, trained to see the details others missed, or perhaps it was the quiet empathy she'd learned from a difficult childhood. She started to notice things, small, insignificant details that, when pieced together, began to form a picture. Mr. Sato didn't just eat his toast, he performed a ceremony. He would take the single slice of wheat toast and break it. Not into 2 pieces or into random crumbs. He would break it into precisely 7 pieces, every single day. 7. Then there were the sugar packets. He never used them in his coffee, which he drank black. But he would take 3 packets from the dispenser, 1 pink, 1 blue, 1 white. He wouldn't open them. Instead, he would arrange them on the table. The arrangement was never the same. Sometimes they were in a straight line, sometimes a triangle. Sometimes the pink one would be set apart from the others. And finally, the spoon. After he finished his coffee, he would take the clean, unused spoon that came with it and place it on the napkin. Its position was always deliberate. Sometimes the bowl of the spoon faced up, sometimes down. Sometimes it pointed towards the window, other times towards the door. To Brenda and Frank, it was just the meaningless fiddling of a senile old man. "Look at him, playing with his food like a toddler," Brenda would whisper to Sarah. "It's a crying shame." But Sarah didn't see madness. She saw intention. It was too precise, too consistent to be random. It was a code, a message in a bottle thrown into the sea of the bustling diner, a message no one was bothering to read. She kept a small notebook behind the counter, and when no one was looking, she would sketch the arrangements of the sugar packets and the spoon, noting the date. She knew little about his life, only the public details gleaned from online articles. Kenjiro Sato, the reclusive tech genius, founder of Ether Systems, a pioneering data logistics company. His net worth was estimated to be in the 9-figure range. The articles mentioned a wife, Eleanor, and a daughter, Lily. But they were always mentioned in the past tense. A tragic car accident, 10 years ago. After that, the public appearances stopped. The interviews ceased. Kenjiro Sato, the innovator, had vanished, leaving only the ghost in booth 4. One Monday morning, something changed. Mr. Sato came in at his usual time, performed his usual ritual. But as he sat, staring out the window, Sarah saw a single tear trace a path down his weathered cheek. It was a silent, lonely journey, disappearing into the collar of his expensive suit. He didn't wipe it away. He didn't seem to even notice it. In that moment, Sarah's quiet observation turned into a quiet resolve. This wasn't just a puzzle to be solved. This was a man drowning in an ocean of grief, and his strange rituals were the only lighthouse he had left. She didn't know what the 7 pieces of toast meant, or what the sugar packets were saying, but she felt a powerful, undeniable conviction that it meant something, and she was going to find out what. She went home that night, and instead of studying Renaissance art, she started researching something else entirely: the silent languages of loss. Sarah's apartment was a testament to a life lived on the narrow margins of a student's budget. Books were stacked on the floor, sketches were taped to the walls, and the scent of turpentine and coffee perpetually lingered in the air. Her world was one of color, form, and history, of understanding the hidden narratives within a brushstroke or a block of marble. Now she was applying that same intensity to a different kind of canvas, the small formica-topped table in booth 4. She spread her sketches from her notebook across her worn wooden desk. 3 years of diagrams, the sugar packets, pink, blue, white, the spoon, the 7 pieces of toast. The toast was the constant. 7 pieces. Always 7. Why 7? 7 days in a week? 7 deadly sins? It felt too arbitrary. Then she remembered the brief mention in one of the articles. The accident had happened on May 7th. A coincidence? Maybe. But her intuition screamed it was a starting point. 7 pieces, a daily memorial to the day his world ended. The sugar packets were the variable. They were the words. She tried to find a pattern. She cross-referenced the dates of her sketches with news headlines, weather patterns, holidays. Nothing. It was a language without a key. She felt a growing frustration. She was looking at the symbols, but she didn't understand the grammar. Her research into the languages of grief led her down a rabbit hole of psychology and anthropology. She read about mourning rituals in different cultures, about how people create personal ceremonies to cope with unbearable loss. These rituals weren't for an audience, they were for the self. They were a way to impose order on a world that had become chaotic and meaningless. This resonated deeply with what she saw in Mr. Sato. He wasn't trying to communicate with the diner, he was trying to communicate with his past. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place. While researching his late wife, Eleanor Sato, she found more than just a name. Eleanor had been a poet, not a famous one, but she had published a single, small volume of poetry through a university press years ago, titled The Color of Rain. It was long out of print. After a week of scouring online used bookstores, Sarah found a single copy being sold by a small shop in Portland, Oregon. She spent a week's worth of her tip money to have it shipped overnight. When the book arrived, it was thin and unassuming, its cover a simple grey with elegant white lettering. Sarah brewed a pot of tea and began to read. Eleanor's poetry was beautiful, filled with quiet observations on life, love, and nature. But it was the middle section, a series of poems about her family, that made Sarah's heart stop. One poem, titled Morning Trio, was about their breakfast routine. It read, "You, my love, a steady strength, a dark and bitter brew. She, our daughter, sweetness spun, a vibrant rosy hue. And I, the pale and quiet page, where both your worlds align, a morning trio, safe and warm, a love that is divine." Sarah's hands trembled as she read the lines again. Dark and bitter brew, black coffee. Mr. Sato. Sweetness spun, a vibrant rosy hue. A daughter. Lily. The pink packet. The pale and quiet page. Eleanor herself. The white packet. Her eyes darted to her sketches. The blue packet. It wasn't in the poem, but Ether Systems, his company, his life's work. Its logo was a stark, sapphire blue. Black coffee was him. The pink packet was his daughter, Lily. The white packet was his wife, Eleanor. The blue packet was his work, his legacy. Suddenly, her 3 years of sketches weren't random scribbles anymore. They were sentences, family portraits drawn with sugar packets. She flipped through her notebook, her mind racing. A sketch from last Christmas. The pink and white packets were set far apart from the blue one and the coffee cup. He was spending the holiday without his family, lost in his work. A sketch from Lily's birthday, which she'd found in an old society column. The pink packet was placed in the center, with the white one and the coffee cup on either side, like parents embracing a child. The blue packet was off to the very edge of the table. On her birthday, his work meant nothing. Only his family mattered. It was all there. A diary of grief, laid out every morning for anyone to see, but written in a language only he and his wife would have understood. The spoon was the final piece. She flipped to another of Eleanor's poems, Direction. It was about finding one's way after being lost. It spoke of looking up to the heavens for hope, or down to the earth for grounding, out to the horizon for the future, or back to the door of the past. The spoon was his emotional state. Pointing up, a day of hope, however small. Pointing down, a day of despair. Pointing towards the window, the future. He was trying to look forward. Pointing towards the door, the past. He was trapped in his memories. Sarah leaned back in her chair, a profound sense of awe and sadness washing over her. For 3 years, this brilliant, broken man had been screaming his story in silence. He wasn't crazy. He was a poet, using the mundane objects on a diner table to compose a daily ode to his lost love. He was keeping their memory alive in the only way he knew how. The knowledge was a heavy weight. What could she do with it? To reveal it would feel like a violation of something incredibly private. To ignore it felt like a betrayal. She was no longer just an observer. She was now the sole keeper of his secret language. She thought about the tear she had seen. In her notebook, she found the sketch for that day. The pink and white packets were touching. The coffee cup was next to them. The blue packet was nowhere in sight. But the spoon was pointing directly down, pressed hard against the napkin, as if trying to bury itself. It was the anniversary of the accident. He hadn't just been sad. He had been in the depths of utter despair, reliving the moment his world had crumbled. The next morning, Sarah's hands shook as she prepared his order. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She knew what she had to do. It was a terrifying risk. He could lash out, he could leave and never return, he could simply ignore her, confirming her insignificance. But she had to try. She had to let him know that someone was listening. She walked to booth 4, placed the coffee and toast on the table, and turned to leave as usual. But then she stopped. With a deep breath, she reached for the sugar dispenser. Her fingers closed around a single white packet. She placed it on the table, a few inches from his cup. Then she took a pink packet and placed it right next to the white one. Mr. Sato, who was staring out the window, froze. His entire body went rigid. For the first time in 3 years, his gaze broke from the horizon outside and fell to the table. He stared at the 2 sugar packets, the wife and daughter, placed together. Slowly, deliberately, Sarah took a step back, her eyes locked on his. She didn't smile. She didn't offer a word of explanation. She simply gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. A nod that said, "I see you. I hear you." For a full minute, he did not move. The diner hummed around them, a world oblivious to the silent, seismic event taking place in booth 4. Then, very slowly, he lifted his head and looked at her. Really looked at her. And for the first time, Sarah saw past the vacancy in his eyes. She saw a flicker of disbelief, of shock, and of something that looked terrifyingly like hope. He didn't speak, but his eyes asked a single, resounding question. How? The silent acknowledgement hung in the air between them for a week. Sarah didn't push. Every morning, she would bring his order, and before leaving, she would simply place the white and pink sugar packets together near his cup. It was her way of saying, "They are here with you." He, in turn, began to change his own ritual. The spoon, which had so often pointed down towards the earth, now consistently pointed towards the window, towards the future. It was a subtle shift, a conversation happening in a language of 2, but for Sarah, it felt monumental. A fragile trust was being built, one sugar packet at a time. Brenda, of course, noticed. "What's with you and the ghost, kid?" she asked one afternoon, leaning against the counter while polishing cutlery. "You're arranging his sugar for him now. You hoping for a bigger tip?" "He just seems to like it that way," Sarah replied vaguely, her face flushing. "Yeah, well, I'd be careful," Brenda warned, her voice dropping. "Guys like that, they're not just eccentric, they're unpredictable. Don't get tangled up in whatever weirdness is going on in his head." The warning, however well-intentioned, came too late. Sarah was already tangled. She felt a fierce, protective instinct towards the quiet man in booth 4. He was no longer a puzzle. He was a person she was beginning to understand. It was on a blustery Tuesday morning that the outside world finally breached the sanctity of their silent ritual. The diner door opened with a blast of cold air. But it was the man who entered, who sent a chill through the room. He was the antithesis of Mr. Sato. Where his uncle was understated elegance and quiet sorrow, this man was loud, slick, and radiated an aggressive, predatory charm. He wore a suit that was too shiny, a watch that was too big, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He scanned the diner, his gaze landing on booth 4. The smile widened. "Uncle Ken!" he boomed, his voice startling the few customers present. Mr. Sato flinched, a barely perceptible tightening of his shoulders. He didn't turn his head. He seemed to shrink into himself, the fragile progress of the past week evaporating like steam from a coffee cup. The man strode over to the booth and slid in, uninvited. "It's me, David. David Hayes, your nephew. Marion's boy?" He leaned in close. "I've been trying to reach you for weeks. Your lawyer, Miller, is a real bulldog. Won't let anyone through." Mr. Sato remained silent, his eyes fixed on the salt shaker. Sarah watched from behind the counter, her stomach twisting into a knot. Frank came out from the kit-haze, wiping his hands on his apron. "Can I help you?" Frank asked, his tone wary. David Hayes flashed his brilliant, empty smile. "David Hayes, I'm just here to check on my uncle, Kenjiro Sato. We're all very worried about him." He lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper that was still loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "He hasn't been, well, you know, not since the tragedy. We just want to make sure he's being taken care of." He gestured around the greasy spoon. "And that he's in a suitable environment." The condescension was palpable. Frank's face hardened. "He's a paying customer. He's fine." David chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. "Of course. Look, can I get a coffee? And maybe you," he pointed at Sarah. "Could you tell me, has my uncle been exhibiting any strange behaviors? Talking to himself? Agitation? You can be honest. It's for his own good." Sarah felt a surge of anger. This man wasn't worried. He was prospecting. He was a vulture, circling, assessing the state of the carcass. "He's a perfect gentleman," Sarah said, her voice steady and cold. "He's quiet, that's all." David's eyes narrowed slightly, assessing her. A quiet man who tips $50 for a $3 breakfast. Right. Very normal. He turned his attention back to Mr. Sato, who was now meticulously breaking his toast into 7 pieces, his hands moving with a tremor Sarah had never seen before. "See?" David said, gesturing to the toast. "This is what I'm talking about. The doctors say it's a sign of cognitive decay. Repetitive, meaningless actions. He needs proper care, full-time supervision." The words hung in the air, clinical and cruel. Meaningless actions. David saw the same thing as everyone else. Madness. He had no idea he was witnessing a love letter. Mr. Sato continued his ritual, his focus absolute. He arranged the sugar packets. Sarah watched, her heart aching. He placed the pink and white packets together. Then he took the blue packet, his work, and placed it directly between himself and his nephew. A barrier. Finally, he took his spoon and pointed it directly at the door. "I want you to leave." David, of course, saw none of it. He just saw a mess on the table. He sighed dramatically. "Uncle Ken, please, we're trying to help you. The family has decided it's time to step in. We're going to court to establish a conservatorship. It's for the best. We'll manage your affairs, your estate. You won't have to worry about a thing." The word estate was the key. This wasn't about care. It was about control, about money. Ether Systems was worth hundreds of millions. Mr. Sato finished his coffee in one long swallow. He stood up, his movements stiff. He placed a crisp $50 bill on the table as always. As he moved to leave, David grabbed his arm. "Don't walk away from me, Uncle. We're family." For the first time, Mr. Sato reacted. He looked down at his nephew's hand on his arm, his expression one of profound distaste. He didn't pull away. He simply waited. The silence in the diner was now thick with tension. After a long moment, David, unnerved by the intensity of his uncle's silent stare, let go. Mr. Sato walked out of the diner without a backward glance. David watched him go, a frustrated, hungry look on his face. He then turned his attention back to the staff. "I can see I'll get no help here," he said, pulling a business card from his wallet and tossing it on the counter. "If he does anything unusual, you call me. There will be a generous reward for your cooperation. We're building a case, and testimony from people who see him every day would be very persuasive." He walked out, and the diner seemed to exhale. Brenda was the first to speak. "Well, I'll be. The plot thickens. Conservatorship. The poor old guy." Frank just grunted and went back to the kit haze. But Sarah stood frozen, staring at the business card. David Hayes, Vice President, Hayes Imports. She now understood the true danger Mr. Sato was in. His silence, his fortress of grief, was being misinterpreted as incompetence. His private language was being used as evidence against him, and the only other person in the world who could translate it was a 22-year-old waitress in a Cleveland diner. The vulture was circling, and she was the only one who could stand in its way. The thought was terrifying, but it was also clarifying. Her role was no longer passive. She had to do more than just listen. She had to find a way to speak for him. The diner felt different after David Hayes's visit. A shadow of menace lingered over booth 4. Every time the bell on the door jingled, Sarah's head would snap up, a knot of anxiety tightening in her chest, half expecting to see the slick nephew return with lawyers and doctors in tow. Mr. Sato continued his morning ritual, but the fragile peace was gone. There was a new tension in his shoulders, a haunted look in his eyes. His spoon, once hopefully pointed toward the window, now wavered, some days pointing down, others back toward the door. He was retreating. Sarah knew she couldn't let that happen. Her simple gesture of placing the sugar packets was no longer enough. It was a shared secret. But a secret wouldn't stand up in court. David Hayes was weaponizing his uncle's grief, and she needed to give Mr. Sato a better weapon to fight back. She needed to escalate their silent conversation. She went back to Eleanor Sato's book of poetry, The Color of Rain. She read it not just for meaning, but for structure, for rhythm. She looked for a way to move beyond the simple nouns of their sugar packet language, me, wife, daughter, work, and into verbs, into actions and intentions. One poem, unspoken, caught her eye. It was a short, devastating piece about communication in the face of sorrow. Where words have failed and breath is thin, a touch, a glance, is where we begin. Let silver speak a silent plea, arranged for none but you to see. Let silver speak a silent plea. The spoon. It wasn't just an indicator of his mood, it could be more. It could be a verb, an action, a question. The next morning, her heart felt like it was doing a drum solo against her ribs. Mr. Sato arrived, the weight of the world seemingly on his shoulders. He sat, and Sarah brought his order. He began his ritual, breaking the toast, his hands less steady than usual. He placed his coffee cup, himself, the white packet, Eleanor, and the pink packet, Lily, in a tight cluster. A family huddling together against a threat. He then took the blue packet, his work, his fortune, and pushed it far across the table, a gesture of angry dismissal. He was blaming his wealth for attracting the vulture. This was her chance. After he had finished, he placed his spoon down, its bowl facing the floor in a sign of despair. Sarah walked over to clear the plates, her movements deliberately slow and calm. As her hand reached for the saucer, she accidentally knocked the spoon. It clattered softly on the formica. "Oh, excuse me," she murmured. She picked it up, but instead of putting it on the dirty plate, she placed it back on the clean napkin. She didn't put it where he had left it. She laid it down between his coffee cup, him, and the cluster of his family. She angled it so the handle touched his cup, and the bowl pointed directly at the pink and white packets. Let silver speak a silent plea. Her message was clear, posed as a question. Are you reaching for them? Are you trying to connect with them? Mr. Sato's head, which had been bowed, slowly lifted. He stared at the spoon. He looked at its new position, a silver bridge between himself and the representation of his lost family. He understood the question instantly. His breath hitched. He looked up at Sarah, his eyes wide with an astonishment, so profound it seemed to erase the lines of grief from his face for a fleeting second. He had created a language of mourning, a one-way monologue to the ghosts of his past. He never imagined someone would not only learn to understand it, but would dare to speak it back to him. He didn't answer her question, not with the spoon. He didn't need to. His eyes gave the answer. They glistened with unshed tears, but for the first time, they weren't tears of pure sorrow. They were tears of recognition, of being seen. He took the $50 bill from his pocket and placed it under the saucer. Then he did something he had never done before. He reached out and with a single finger, gently tapped the table right beside her hand. It was a gesture of immense significance, a touch, a confirmation. Where words have failed, a touch, a glance is where we begin. Sarah retreated to the counter, her own eyes blurring. The Kitay's clatter, Brenda's chatter, the sizzle of the grill. It all faded into a distant hum. In the silent space of booth 4, something sacred had just happened. They had moved beyond simple statements and into a true dialogue. The next day, he came in and constructed a scene on his table. The pink and white packets were together. His coffee cup was close by, and he took his spoon and laid it down just as she had, a bridge between him and them. It was his answer. Yes, every day I am reaching for them. Sarah felt a surge of triumph, immediately tempered by the gravity of their situation. This was progress, but it was still a secret. David Hayes was moving forward with his legal proceedings. She'd overheard Frank talking on the phone. A man, a lawyer type, had called the diner asking if the owner would be willing to testify about Mr. Sato's debilitated condition. She had to get Mr. Sato a real message, a warning. The poetry book was her guide. She found another poem, The Coming Storm, which spoke of vultures dressed in finery and cages built of false concern. The next morning, the challenge was more complex. How to communicate a vulture? When Mr. Sato came in, she served him as usual. While he was distracted by the view out the window, she walked by the table and tidied up the napkin dispenser. As she did, she took one of the plain black coffee stirrers from its container. She broke it in half, creating two small, sharp-looking black sticks. Later, when she came to clear his table, he had arranged his usual scene: the family, the spoon reaching for them. With practiced casualness, she placed the two black sticks she had palmed near the blue sugar packet. His fortune! The sticks looked like circling birds of prey. Vultures are circling your money. He saw it instantly. A flicker of fear crossed his face, followed by a look of grim understanding. He knew. He wasn't insulated from the world. He just chose not to engage with it. He gave a short, sharp nod in her direction. Message received. Their silent conversations became richer, more complex. Sarah would pose questions or offer statements using the cutlery, the condiments, the very layout of the table. He would respond in kind. They spoke of memory, of grief, of anger, of the smallest slivers of hope. They were co-authoring a new volume of poetry on a diner table. One rainy Thursday, Mr. Sato did something that changed the dynamic completely. After finishing his meal, he left the customary $50 bill. But tucked underneath it was another bill, a crisp $100 bill. And folded inside it was a small, yellowed newspaper clipping. Sarah's hands shook as she unfolded it. It wasn't an article about his company or the accident. It was a university notice from over 20 years ago. A small photo showed a much younger, smiling Eleanor Sato. The caption read, "Local poet Eleanor Sato wins the prestigious Chandler Prize for her collection, The Color of Rain." And at the bottom of the clipping, written in a faint but elegant hand, was a single word: help. The single word on the newspaper clipping, help, was a thunderclap in the quiet world Sarah and Mr. Sato had built. It transformed her from a secret confidant into an active conspirator. His silence was no longer just a shield of grief, it was a prison, and David Hayes was about to lock the door and throw away the key. The note was an admission that he couldn't fight back alone. The $100 bill wasn't a tip, it was a retainer. He was hiring her in the only way he could. Sarah knew she couldn't handle this on her own. She looked up the name of the lawyer David had mentioned with such disdain. Robert Miller. An old-school name for what she hoped was an old-school, loyal attorney. She found his office in a stately old building downtown, a world away from the Morning Star diner. Taking a deep breath, she made the call. She had to fight through a skeptical secretary, refusing to state her business over the phone. "It's about a private matter concerning your client, Kenjiro Sato," was all she would say, repeating it with a firmness that surprised even herself. Eventually, she was granted a 10-minute meeting. Robert Miller was exactly what she had pictured. He was in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a suit that was well made but comfortably worn. His office was filled with law books, leather chairs, and the quiet dignity of a long, distinguished career. He looked tired. "Miss Jenkins," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "My secretary tells me you're a waitress at the diner Mr. Sato frequents. I must admit, I'm intrigued." "Mr. Miller," Sarah began, her voice betraying a slight tremble. "I know this is going to sound crazy, but Mr. Sato isn't who you think he is. He's not incompetent. He's speaking. You just have to know the language." For the next hour, the 10 minutes forgotten, Sarah laid it all out. She showed him her notebook, filled with 3 years of sketches. She brought Eleanor Sato's book of poetry, its pages now dog-eared. She explained the meaning of the 7 pieces of toast, the symbolism of the sugar packets, the grammar of the spoon. She explained their silent conversations, from her first tentative placement of the packets to his desperate written plea for help. Robert Miller listened with the patience of a seasoned lawyer, his expression shifting from polite skepticism to cautious interest, and finally to utter, rapt fascination. He leaned forward, studying the sketches as if they were evidence in a murder trial. "My God," he whispered when she had finished, leaning back in his chair and rubbing his eyes. "For 3 years. I've been trying to get through to him. I've been his lawyer and friend for 30 years. I knew him before he met Eleanor. I watched him build his empire from nothing. After the accident, he just vanished inside himself. I've been fighting his nephew's legal maneuvers with everything I have, but Ken won't cooperate. He won't speak to me, to the doctors, to anyone. I thought..." He trailed off, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought I'd lost my friend. I thought the man I knew was gone." "He's not gone," Sarah said softly. "He's trapped. He's been speaking his wife's language. I think he felt it was the only way to keep her with him." Miller stood and paced the room, his energy renewed. "David Hayes has filed a petition for an emergency conservatorship. The hearing is in 2 weeks. He's got 2 doctors on his side, ready to testify that Ken's catatonic silence and bizarre ritualistic behaviors are clear evidence of diminished capacity. We have nothing to counter with. Until now." He stopped and looked at Sarah, a new respect in his eyes. "This is inadmissible, you know. A judge will laugh this out of court. The poetry of sugar packets. It sounds like a fantasy." Sarah's heart sank. "So what do we do?" "We don't play by their rules," Miller said, a spark of his old bulldog tenacity returning. "We don't try to prove he's sane. We let Ken himself prove it. But we need a stage, and we need to prepare our actor." He looked at Sarah. "You're his only line of communication. Can you get a more complex message to him?" "I can try," she said, her resolve hardening. Their plan was audacious. Sarah became the conduit between the grieving genius and his lawyer. Every morning at the diner, her interactions with Mr. Sato took on a new layer of urgency. Using an increasingly complex vocabulary of cutlery, condiments, and clippings from Eleanor's book, she and Miller began to feed him information and ask him questions. A salt shaker placed next to the blue packet meant, "Your assets." A knife laid across it meant, "They are under threat." Sarah would slide a business card for Robert Miller onto the table. "He is on your side." Mr. Sato, in turn, began to respond with astonishing clarity. He started using the number of sugar packets to signify dates. He would arrange crumbs of toast to form initials of people involved in his business. He was a brilliant man, a master of systems and logic, and he was now applying that intellect to the language he had created out of love and sorrow. He was waking up. Through their strange tabletop correspondence, a story emerged. David Hayes wasn't just a greedy nephew. For the past 2 years, he had been systematically embezzling money from the foreign accounts of Ether Systems, using a shell corporation, Hayes Imports, to launder the funds. He had been sloppy, leaving a digital paper trail, but he was betting on the fact that the company's silent, reclusive owner would never notice. The conservatorship wasn't just about getting the rest of the money. It was about burying his crimes for good. If he could have his uncle declared incompetent, any evidence he might uncover would be dismissed as the ramblings of a madman. Mr. Sato, using toast crumbs and spoon positions, guided Miller's paralegals to the exact server directories and account numbers where the evidence of David's fraud was hidden. The quiet man in booth 4 was directing a multi-million-dollar legal battle from a greasy spoon diner. One morning, a week before the hearing, Sarah needed to convey the final, crucial part of their plan. She brought his order, her hand steady now, filled with purpose. After he finished, she came to the table. She picked up the spoon. She held it up for a moment, letting the light catch it. This was the most important verse she had ever composed. She placed the spoon vertically above his coffee cup, the bowl facing up. The message from Eleanor's poem was clear. Speak to the heavens. Speak up. Then she took a single white sugar packet, Eleanor, and placed it gently inside the bowl of the spoon, as if it were being lifted up. The message was unmistakable, a direct plea built on the foundation of their shared language. Let her voice be your voice. Speak for her. Mr. Sato stared at the tableau. His hand, resting on the table, clenched into a fist. A storm of emotions seemed to pass over his face. Grief, anger, resolve. He looked at the spoon holding the white packet, a silver vessel for his wife's memory. For 10 years he had been silent to honor her. Now he had to speak to protect what they had built together, to honor her legacy. He looked up at Sarah. The vacancy was completely gone. In its place was the sharp, focused intelligence of the man who had built an empire. He gave her a single, decisive nod. The ghost of Booth 4 was ready for war. The tension in the Morning Star diner snapped 2 days before the hearing. David Hayes arrived, not with booming threats, but with a colder, more calculated menace. He was flanked by his sharp-suited lawyer, Ms. Albright, and a private investigator. They slid into the booth across from Mr. Sato, their presence a calculated violation of his sanctuary. It was a power play, meant to provoke a reaction they could use in court. Note the repetitive hand motions, Ms. Albright murmured, just loud enough for the staff to hear. Classic detachment from reality. Sarah watched from the service station, her blood boiling. They were clinically dissecting a man's soul without having any concept of its existence. Mr. Sato, however, remained a fortress of calm, proceeding with his ritual as if they weren't there. When he finished, Sarah approached the table to clear it, her every move scrutinized. "My uncle seems to have taken a liking to you," David said, his voice dripping with insinuation. "A lonely, confused old man with a 9-figure bank account. It's a classic story. Let me give you some advice. Don't get any ideas." Sarah met his condescending gaze without flinching. "I think you misunderstand," she said, her voice low but firm. "Some people see a walking bank account. I just see a man. You see what you want to see, I guess." Before David could retort, Miss Albright delivered their final blow. "Mr. Sato," she announced loudly, "we have a court order for a psychiatric evaluation. A doctor will meet you here tomorrow morning. Your failure to cooperate will be noted by the judge." Mr. Sato gave no reaction. He simply stood, placed his $50 bill on the table, and walked towards the door. As he passed David's booth, he paused, his gaze resting for a single intense moment on their salt shaker. Then he was gone. David smirked, confident in his victory. But Sarah had seen the look. She remembered a line from Eleanor's poetry about betrayal. One you trust puts salt in the earth for you. It was a message. Mr. Sato wasn't gone. He was ready. The courtroom was a sterile, impersonal space. Ms. Albright presented her case with ruthless efficiency, calling a psychiatrist who testified that Mr. Sato was profoundly disassociated and engaged in meaningless rituals. She painted a clear picture of a man incapable of managing his own affairs. When it was the defense's turn, Robert Miller called his only witness. "I call Sarah Jenkins to the stand." A murmur went through the room. David Hayes scoffed. The waitress? This was their defense? Sarah walked to the stand and, guided by Miller, explained everything. She told the court that Mr. Sato's actions were not madness, but a language of grief and love based on his late wife's poetry. He wasn't staring into space, Sarah insisted, her voice ringing with conviction. He was composing a daily memorial to his dead wife and daughter. He wasn't lost. He was grieving. Ms. Albright's cross-examination was scathing. You expect this court to believe you're the secret interpreter for a millionaire who speaks through sugar packets. How convenient for you. He wasn't speaking to me, not at first, Sarah replied, looking at the judge. He was speaking to his wife. I just learned the language. The judge, though intrigued, was clearly skeptical. He turned to the silent figure at the defendant's table. Mr. Sato, he said gently. Sir, can you confirm any of this? Can you tell us, in your own words, what is happening? The courtroom held its breath. Mr. Sato did not move. He didn't even blink. A look of triumph spread across David's face. It was over. Then Robert Miller made his final, desperate move. He walked to his client's table and placed a single, long-stemmed silver spoon before him. He then took a small, folded piece of white paper and carefully placed it in the bowl of the spoon, lifting it up. Let her voice be your voice. Speak for her. Mr. Sato looked down at the tableau. A tremor ran through his body. His lips parted, and a dry, rasping sound, the ghost of a voice, unused for a decade, filled the room. Eleanor, he whispered. He cleared his throat, and when he spoke again, his voice was stronger, quoting the last line from his wife's most famous poem. The color of rain is not gray. It is the color of the world seen through a window, waiting for you to come home. He lowered his head, then raised it, and the vacant gaze was gone. In its place was the piercing intellect of a titan. He stood, his presence commanding the room, and turned his eyes on his nephew. Your Honor, he said, his voice now resonant with power. For 10 years I have been silent. Not because I was incompetent, but because I was grieving. My nephew mistook my sorrow for senility. He was busy, you see. Busy siphoning over $14 million from my company into a shell corporation. He named the offshore accounts and the exact server directories where the proof could be found. David Hayes's face turned ashen white. My rituals were my anchor, Mr. Sato declared. Until this young woman, he nodded to Sarah, his eyes full of profound gratitude, took the time not just to see, but to understand. She did not see a madman or a millionaire. She saw a husband and a father. He faced the judge. I am not incompetent, Your Honor. I am finished with grieving, and I am now ready to manage my affairs. Starting with the felony grand larceny charges, I will be filing against Mr. Hayes. The judge stared, stunned, then brought his gavel down with a resounding crack. The petition for conservatorship, he boomed, is dismissed. In the end, it wasn't a team of high-priced lawyers or doctors who saved Kenjiro Sato. It was a young waitress who saw a story where everyone else saw sickness. Kenjiro, with his voice returned, not only exposed his nephew's crimes, but began to reconnect with the world he had left behind. He didn't just thank Sarah with money. He established the Eleanor and Lily Sato Foundation to support young artists and poets, putting Sarah on the board and funding her entire education, allowing her to trade her waitress apron for a life dedicated to the arts she loved. The Morning Star Diner became a local legend, a place where a silent millionaire and a perceptive waitress reminded an entire city that the deepest human connections are often forged not in what is said, but in what is understood. This story is a powerful reminder that everyone around us is living a life as complex and detailed as our own. Sometimes, the quietest people have the loudest stories. It challenges us to look past the surface, to listen with more than just our ears, and to have the courage to try and understand the silent languages being spoken all around us. If this story touched you, please give this video a like, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that explore the incredible depths of the human heart. Let us know in the comments. Have you ever misjudged someone, only to find out they had an incredible story hidden inside?